welcome to another episode of The Royal Record here on GB News. I'm Cameron Walker, GB News' Royal Correspondent.
And I'm Svar Nanan-Sen, Royal Editor of gbnews.com. Coming up, GB News presenter Ellie Costello provides her first-hand account of Harry, Meghan, William and Catherine's final engagement together.
And later, Svar and I will be delving into Harry and Meghan, the feuds between them and the royal family, and if there is any way back for them in the United Kingdom. Well, we're delighted to be joined by GB News presenter Ellie Costello. Ellie, welcome to the Royal Record podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's our pleasure.
Do you know, this is really weird because usually you're the one interviewing me and it's the other way around this time.
I feel like the roles have been reversed.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, we've got to talk about this month's Trooping the Colour, because it was just so magical after the year the royal family have had with all the horrible kind of health scares that they've had, to see both the King and the Princess of Wales actually there in front of the public.
It was the light in the darkness, wasn't it? I think the family have had just such a difficult 6 months in particular, with the King's cancer diagnosis, with Catherine's cancer diagnosis. It really was just so moving, actually. I felt moved to see them together as a family, and obviously the pomp and the pageantry and everything that we do so well as the British royal family, but to actually see them together as a unit and to see the King looking so well. Catherine, I thought, did look a little bit weak compared to how she does usually look, but to see her there with the children and looking so beautiful, it really was just a magical moment, really, to see, and very moving. I imagine lots of people across the country felt moved by that.
Yeah, I think Trooping the Colour is always a highlight of the royal calendar, but this year it did feel extra special, didn't it, with all the health circumstances that are going on, to see the King, Kate, and also the children looking so happy as well.
I think it had the emotional element this year that perhaps it hadn't had in times before. I mean, it's got the pomp, the pageantry, but it is that sense of duty, isn't it? And just coming out and doing your duty and doing it so well. But this time it did feel more like a family occasion.
Family unity.
And being front and centre. And we hear so much, don't we, about having this reduced royal family and having a smaller circle, and it felt intimate this year and very special, so it was lovely. Despite the rain, it was lovely, wasn't it?
I know, I got drenched and I was in a tent. It was sideways, this rain. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I'm so annoyed.
I know exactly how it feels.
But those poor punters who had just kind of stood waiting for 24 hours to see the Princess and the King on the balcony and the rest of the royal family.
Yeah, you were saying that people got to the Mall at 3:30 or something the day before.
Yeah.
Wow.
People are incredible, aren't they? They really are.
It's
and
the
I
dedication.
hope, and I said this to you on the day, didn't I? I said, I really hope the King feels that warmth from the British public, because I don't know if this has struck you too in covering the King since he obviously came to the throne, but I think the late Queen obviously had so much love and adoration, didn't she, from so many people all across the world. I don't think he ever felt that. He was always in her shadow, and I think for the first time, especially since his cancer diagnosis, he's seeing it for himself.
Yeah.
And you know, when he opened his birthday cards this year, and you could see the emotion in his eyes, I think it's the first time he's really felt that outpouring of love for himself.
And speaking of the emotion, seeing him on the balcony, I thought he looked a little bit emotional.
I did too.
Yeah.
When he was waving to the crowds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I thought that too. I thought Queen Camilla looked a little bit impatient. I think she got a bit cold, perhaps.
She wanted the lunch.
She wanted the lunch. You could see her, couldn't you? During the Trooping the Colours, she had her blanket over her knees. I think she was struggling with the weather. Yeah. But he, you're right, had emotion in his eyes. I think he was really moved by the crowds. I think it still surprises him. I don't think he's used to being, on the throne, being the centre of attention. He's been in the shadows as the heir for so long.
Whereas the Princess is used to being in the spotlight and being centre of attention. She's usually on the front page of a newspaper if she does something the day before, but an awful lot of pressure for her first public appearance since Christmas Day last year.
You can't even imagine, can you, the pressure that she felt the night before Trooping the Colour, because I remember you saying there was going to be a statement from the palace at about 6 p.m. the night before Trooping the Colour, and I thought, this is going to be it, isn't it? She's going to be at Trooping the Colour. We'd hoped that would be the case, of course, but she wasn't able to make, was it the Colonel's Review the week before?
Yeah, the kind of dress rehearsal for Trooping.
Exactly, which is the dress rehearsal for Trooping. So I thought then we're not going to see her. And I remember seeing you in the office, Cameron. I said, she's not going to be there, is she? Because if she couldn't do the week before, it's very unlikely she'd actually make the main event. So then to hear the night before that she was going to do it, you can only imagine the pressure that she felt. Her first public appearance in 6 months. But she aced it as she always does. I mean, she looked absolutely beautiful. I loved what she wore. And she went beautifully matched, didn't she, with the children? They've all gone for this white and navy ensemble.
And she matched with Audrey Hepburn from My Fair Lady.
She did!
Yes.
Do you think that was the inspiration?
Oh, I don't know. I think nothing in the royal family happens by accident. There must have been some subtle message she was trying to get across. Because also, over the last 6 months, the amount of horrible trolls on social media who've been targeting the princess for various reasons has been horrific and must have been very hard to deal with.
Just absolutely horrific. I felt so sorry for her. I think cancer is one of the worst things that we can ever imagine happening to any of us or our loved ones. And then to have that ongoing health battle amidst public scrutiny to that degree, and as you say, the most poisonous things going around about her online. I mean, even this week, I'm not even going to give it any airtime or say them on this podcast, but some of the rumours that are continuing to go on about herself and about William are cruel. They're nothing more than that. And I actually feel so sorry for her. And I think she handles them, as she does with everything that she does, with so much grace.
And we are getting more and more from the princess. Of course, we had the horrible situation with the Mother's Day photograph that was pulled by agencies with the various editing. But in the last few weeks, we've had a lovely photograph of Father's Day that she had taken in Norfolk of the 3 children. And then on Prince William's birthday, we also had another photograph, which was probably the most informal yet brilliant photograph I've ever seen, which she has taken.
Isn't it just amazing? I love that photo. It really brought a smile to my face. They just seem like such a lovely family. There is so much love between Catherine and William. And I think that's a really important thing to say, because there have been really horrible rumours about them as a couple, haven't there, in the last 6 months or so. But even in her statements during the cancer diagnosis, she talks about William and I and me and William. They are very much a unit, the two of them. And I think they're really strong. I think if anything, it's made them stronger the last 6 months. And then they really do protect those children with everything that they have. You know, we've barely seen Prince Louis, we've barely seen Princess Charlotte in the last 6 months whilst their mother's been sick. And it's very clear that they are the priority. And I think those family pictures are they just summarise everything, don't they?
Another thing,
they're a happy family.
Yeah, and I think they're a normal family as well. That's what they capture with those photos. That okay, they are part of the royal family, but away from that and away from public life, they're just like an everyday normal family taking their children to the beach.
Yeah, they're an everyday family on the beach having fun. And I mean, even if they're posed, they're the kind of posed photographs that we'd all have in the family album.
That your mum would make you take anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah,
like jumping up and down on the sand with your dad.
Yeah.
It's lovely. And it's so nice that they allow their children to be children and just play on the beach with their dad.
Yeah.
And you can even see with Louis, you know, at Trooping the Colour, dancing on the balcony. Catherine she wouldn't scold him or pull him away.
Yeah.
She kind of smiles and lets him be a child, which
Princess
is lovely.
Charlotte's
Yeah, I was going to say, Princess Charlotte tries.
That is so true. I love that dynamic, don't you?
It's so lovely.
Great.
And I'm afraid we've got to talk about a very sad situation that happened with the royal family, which you were very heavily involved with covering back in September 2022, and myself, of course. But the death of Queen Elizabeth II, and you were sent to Windsor that day. Just talk us through your memories of that day.
Oh, no, I'll never forget that day. I don't think anyone in Britain will forget that day or where they were when they heard that news. I was actually in London anyway, filming a story at a food bank, and I got the call saying, we think the Queen is sick. Can you just head to Windsor just in case? And obviously all of us hoped that it would be sickness. We know that she'd had COVID about 6 months prior, hadn't she? And she pulled through that. So we just hoped that it was a false alarm. Headed down to Windsor. And I think the longer and longer it went on, and it was a very long afternoon, and we hadn't heard anything from the palace. Then we heard that the family members were rushing up to Balmoral. You do start to think the worst. And being in Windsor was so... special feels like the wrong word, but it was poignant because it was the place where the Queen had chosen to spend the last few years of her life. Prince Andrew obviously lives in Windsor. The Wales family live in Windsor too. So being there, the people that I was speaking to have so much love for the Queen because they'd see her, wouldn't they, in is it Great Windsor Park, walking her corgis or out with the horses. So they were concerned, they were worried. And then when we got that news, I believe it was around 6 p.m.
Yeah, 6:30.
6:30, yes. I was with some women and they'd actually heard the news before I had. It hadn't even come up on my phone yet. And they told me, and they were crying. I had tears in my eyes. And then it was the most magical moment, really. We looked over at Windsor Castle and a rainbow appeared as that news broke. And it was almost as if it was the Queen saying goodbye in her own way.
And I took
a photo at the time and I said, I'll never forget that moment. I was stood there with these ladies, these strangers, but we were united in that moment of grief. I feel choked talking about it. And then that rainbow appeared and it was just, a very special, moving moment. And then just the most incredible scene that night, as night fell, the residents of Windsor just came out with candles, flowers, and just filled that area outside the castle. You'll know it well. You've spent many times there. Just filled that area with candles and flowers.
So beautiful. And I suppose a moment like that does bring people together. And you actually witnessed two perhaps feuding brothers coming together a couple of days later to do a bit of a walkabout. Prince William, Prince Harry, Catherine and Meghan, greeting members of the public, laying flowers with them. What was that like to witness?
Well, it was a complete shock, to be honest with you. So I had essentially moved into Windsor after the late Queen's passing, actually stayed there overnight to capture those images that I was just describing. And I stayed for several days and it was people coming from all around the globe to lay flowers. And the flowers were probably extended about 2-3 meters. They had to keep moving them inside St George's Chapel because there were just so many of them, and you could smell those flowers from the high street coming up to the castle. So it really was the most incredible outpouring of love for the late Queen. And then it must have been about 4 or 5 days into national mourning, we were told, you need to get behind these barriers. So we're like, oh, there must be somebody coming to look at these flowers. And that had been happening. So we're thinking, oh, maybe it's Prince William, maybe it's Princess Catherine. We weren't sure. And then it was going on for several hours, which later became clear why that was. Apparently that the two brothers were talking about the logistics of how they're both going to arrive. So that's what the delay was. But people were building up behind those barriers with the public. We had the media. We had media from all around the globe who were there anyway. And then we saw 2 cars pull up. So I was thinking, oh, it must be William and Harry. And we were so excited about the prospect of it being Prince William and Prince Harry together. So then when the 4 of them emerged from those gates, we couldn't believe our eyes. The Fab Four reunited, and in a way, what a fitting time to do so.
If
anyone was going to bring them together, it would be the late Queen Elizabeth. But it was an awkward walkabout. It really was.
Could you sense that?
Absolutely. I was one of the first journalists behind the barriers, and for me the awkwardness was mostly between the 2 women, which perhaps makes sense, but bearing in mind what we know from the Oprah interviews and Netflix and whatnot. But Meghan was holding on to Harry's back quite a lot. It was touching him a lot. To me, she looked the most insecure in that setup. Catherine looked really stoic, really steadfast in what she wanted to do. She was there to support William. She was there to see the crowds. But I could really sense the tension between the 2 women, especially.
How was the relationship between William and Harry?
Distant. I could sense that there was a distance between the brothers. They kind of stayed on the outside of the 2 women. The 2 women were in the centre from where I could see them. And then they went off into their 2 separate couples to look at the flowers. And then they went down and looked at and met members of the public. I did notice one woman refusing to shake Meghan Markle's hand at one point, which I wasn't sure how I felt about that in a time of grief. And, it was her great grandmother-in-law, I suppose. But there was a frosty reception to that side, and there was actually a groan, an audible groan from the side that Meghan and Harry decided to walk down, rather than the side that Prince William and Princess Catherine decided to walk down.
And Ellie, for the kind of 3 years you've been covering various royal events, what's been the one standout moment for you?
The saddest was, of course, the passing of Queen Elizabeth. That's a moment I'll never forget, being in Windsor and seeing that rainbow with those ladies. And the happiest moment for me was the coronation. The King's coronation was a moment that I'll never, ever, ever forget. I was lucky enough to be presenting breakfast that morning with Stephen Dixon. So we did the run up to the coronation. And then we stayed to watch the Golden State carriage come past with the King in it, and it was just a moment in history. And we're so privileged, aren't we, to be at the front row of history and to see these events. And again, the outpouring of love from people that come from all around the world to be on the Mall and see the King. incredible.
think
Just a moment in history you can't ever forget.
It's the royal family bringing the people of Britain together.
Yeah, that's what they do best.
Ellie Costello, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. That was fun.
It was fun.
Really fun.
Svar, hearing Ellie's first-hand account of seeing the used to be Fab Four arrive in Windsor following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the first time we've seen them together for a long time, and hearing her explain what she saw as the awkwardness of between the four of them, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it sums up just how distant they've become. We know now that since then it's actually got worse. Harry, he published Spare. After that, the Harry and Meghan Netflix documentary came out after the Queen's death as well. So there have been a lot more public attacks or public criticism from Meghan and Harry since then. I think they've got a long way to go to repair their family ties. We did see Harry travel back to the UK in February to see King Charles, but I think Harry's got more of a chance of repairing his relationship with Charles than he does with William. To our knowledge, we don't think Harry has seen William in either of the trips he's made to the UK this year.
No, he hasn't. And I think it was what you mentioned, the February trip that Prince Harry took back to London following the King's cancer diagnosis. He only saw the King for, at the most, 45 minutes. He was in Clarence House for 45 minutes. We don't think, as we understand it, he saw Camilla, so it was only the King. But bearing in mind, I think to any other family, if your father's been diagnosed with cancer and you fly back to see him if you live in a different country and you only spend 45 minutes with him before your father goes off somewhere else, that seems a bit odd. But then on the other hand, we need to remember that the royal family is not like any other family, and particularly because the King is sovereign, he's the monarch, his diary is very, very packed behind the scenes. Everything is very carefully planned to the minute. Even to the point where I think there were some reports that the helicopter which was waiting for King Charles in the Buckingham Palace garden was delayed taking off because King Charles wanted to see his son. So there's little hints that they might be starting to reconcile, but as you say, very long way to go because only 45 minutes.
Yeah, I think that you've got that one aspect that Harry's rushed over to see his father who's been diagnosed with cancer, and you'd expect him to want to spend more than 45 minutes with him. And then you've also got the family aspect of if your son was back in the country having lived in America, that you'd also want to spend more than 45 minutes with him. But as you said, Charles has got a very busy diary, lots of public engagements to do. Do we think there's any room for Prince Harry to start taking up royal engagements with Meghan? It's obviously really unlikely now, and there's such a long way to go in terms of them repairing their feud.
Do you mean in terms of like the working?
Do we think there's any chance long term, if they do manage to repair their feud, that Harry and Meghan could ever be back in the royal family, or do we think that is just never going to happen again?
In terms of the Windsor family, perhaps there's a situation where if there's a lot of reconciling and a lot of talking, they could come to some kind of agreement, or at least be a bit more civil than perhaps they have been over the last few years. In terms of becoming working members of the royal family again, I don't think it would be up to King Charles, because you look at the opinion polls of Harry and Meghan on both sides of the Atlantic, but let's just talk about the UK for now. They consistently poll, and have done since the publication of the Netflix series and Harry's memoir Spare, at the very bottom in terms of, prominent, famous members of the royal family, apart from Prince Andrew, who's slightly below them. That's a big problem, because if they become working members of the royal family again, it's taxpayers, it's us as the public who would have to pay for their security, the staff travel that obviously would have to go with them, and all the rest of it. And I don't think I don't think Meghan wants to be a working member of the royal family again, because clearly she disliked it so much last time. She talked about it at length during the Oprah Winfrey interview, so I don't see that happening. But I think it's just very sad that Prince Harry has effectively lost most physical contact with his nearest and dearest, even if there are the occasional video call to Montecito.
Yeah, and I think Prince William and Princess Catherine would also have very strong opinions on whether Harry and Meghan should be allowed to become working royals again, and that would have to be considered by King Charles if he was the one to make the decision.
Yeah, and I think there's a clear difference between King Charles and the Prince and Princess of Wales, because there is some bond still between Harry and his father, and I think King Charles does love his grandchildren, as in Harry's two children, Lilibet and Archie, who he hasn't seen much, to be honest, since they were born. So that must be very hard for King Charles to deal with, and I think he does want to see them more often. William and Catherine, on the other hand, that, as we understand it, there is very, very limited, if anything, contact between William and his brother Harry. I think the feud runs deep there, and it's getting to the point where every time you ask a question about Prince Harry to anybody close to Prince William, the barriers go up, which suggests to me that there is still a real issue there between William and Harry, and I don't see how that changes in the current circumstances.
Yeah, and I suppose William and Kate don't have any relationship with Archie and Lilibet either. We know that King Charles has only met Lilibet once. So the same probably goes for William and Kate. And then also for Archie and Lilibet, they have no relationship with George, Charlotte and Louis. So
yeah, and they're cousins.
Yeah, and they're cousins. So this feud between Harry and William and Kate and Meghan it's creating a rift down the entire family that is crossing generations.
And I think that's really sad, because what I think is lovely about Prince William's generation is the beautiful bond that he has with his cousins. I mean, we saw it at Ascot a few weeks ago, or last week, I should say, with Zara, Princess Eugenie, and also the garden party a few weeks before that. All the cousins rallying around William, this beautiful bond. And yet George, Charlotte and Louis are not going to have that with their two cousins, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. So it's really sad to see. It's also not their fault. And I think it's going to be interesting in 20 years' time to see if there is any relationship between Archie and Lilibet in California, if they stay in California, and the three royal children here in the UK, because there's going to be more of a culture clash, I think, than there was when Meghan joined the royal family back in 2018.
Yeah, and I think that is part of it. Meghan does seem to have a reluctance now to come back to the UK. She's not been in the UK since September 2022 for Queen Elizabeth's funeral. She did briefly stop off just to then head to Nigeria with Harry when they met at Heathrow Airport.
Yeah, but only in the Windsor suite. She didn't go, UK side. She stayed airside.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that reluctance is then, it affects Harry's ability to bring over Archie and Lilibet, and I don't know how much repairing of a rift you can do through a video call or a phone call, but that's to say that William and Kate would be open to that. There's been so much said about Kate and William from Meghan and Harry now that there may be just a level of no trust at all, and Kate and William may not entertain peace talks.
Well, quite possibly, but from Harry and Meghan's perspective, it may not actually be to do, well, I'm sure there's clearly a little bit to do with William and Catherine, but I think it's to do with safety as well, because if you remember in the Netflix documentary series, Meghan spoke very openly and quite emotionally about the fear she had in terms of her family's safety, checking all the doors were locked at night in her Montecito house, and worried for her children's safety as well. And Prince Harry still has an ongoing legal battle with the Home Office over their decisions to change the level of his police protection when he stood back as a working member of the royal family, and he's been granted permission to appeal the decision to opt out.
You can see how passionately Harry feels about that and how important of an issue it is to him. I mean, he's suffered a couple court defeats now, and he's still fighting his way, and he's got another appeal coming up. So it is.
Sorry, go on.
It is clearly something that they're very concerned about. And I also don't think Harry would be doing this if he didn't envisage coming to the UK more regularly, both himself and his family. He clearly sees it as an important thing to be able to bring over his family.
Well, that's the crux of it, because Harry's case is he does not feel safe. He doesn't feel his family are safe when they're in the UK because they do not have close protection officers with the Metropolitan Police with him. So perhaps that is the main reason why Prince Harry isn't bringing Meghan and Archie and Lilibet over to the UK, because he would say he can't guarantee their safety. And I think in the back of his mind constantly since the 31st of August 1997 is, look what happened to my mother. She lost she chose to not have her protection officers, but the point being she didn't have police protection with her when she died in the car crash in Paris, and I think that really affected Prince Harry. So I think you can see how, from Prince Harry's perspective, he is really fearful about bringing his family over to the UK, and they are hated by a lot of people in this country. So you can see why Prince Harry is being very cautious about bringing his family over to the UK.
Yeah, and something that has made his fears even worse is being evicted from Frogmore Cottage. You know, he said that he felt that was the last safe place in the UK for him and his family, and we haven't seen Meghan, Archie or Lilibet in the UK since they left the royal residence. So I think that's another thing. We haven't seen Harry find a UK home. He's not got a property that he can stay at in the UK, and so I think that's another aspect to it.
And what might be upsetting Harry even more when we talk about the relationships is the lack of, or what he would see as a lack of, maybe support from his father or his brother when it comes to this case against the UK. Now, from a King and William's perspective, they can't get involved in a decision from a Home Office committee. That's up to them. But I think there's been we would usually hear kind of rumours of someone trying to pull the strings behind the scenes, and there's been none of that, which suggests to me that they're kind of leaving Harry to deal with it on his own.
Let us know your thoughts on this by using the hashtag GBNRoyalRecord or emailing us at royal@gbnews.uk.
Well, that's it for another episode of The Royal Record here on GB News. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, you can get your podcast on Spotify, Apple Music and YouTube as well, and social media.
And you can keep up to date with all the latest royal news and analysis by going to gbnews.com/royal or by signing up to the GB News Royal Newsletter.
Until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.